Hello, dear students. How do you do? So today, once again, I am here to explain you a new unit from our Moments book, unit number 5, The Happy Prince, written by Oscar Wilde. The Happy Prince was a beautiful statue. This statue was on a tall pillar. The prince was covered with gold. There were two sapphires in place of his eyes. He had a ruby in his sword hilt. He could see all around the city. When he was alive, he lived in a palace. He was always happy. He had not seen the miseries of life. But now he could see miseries around him. He saw the hungry and the homeless. He was very sad. He was filled with pity. One day a swallow came there. He saw the prince in tears. The prince told him that he wanted to help the poor and sad people. He sent his ruby and the sapphires of his eyes to the poor people. Now he was blind. He sent his gold also. Now he looked ugly. The swallow began to love the prince. The winter came, but the swallow did not go away. He lived with the prince. One day the swallow died. This broke the laden heart of the statue. The statue was no longer beautiful. It was melted in a furnace. But the laden heart did not melt. It was thrown in the dust heap. The dead swallow was also lying there. God sent one of his angels to bring the two most precious things. He took the dead swallow and the laden heart to God. Both these things were really fit for paradise. So students, let's start this interesting story. High above the city on a tall column stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes he had two bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. Gilded means to covered with something, coating of something. Hilt means the handle of a weapon or tool, especially a sword, dagger or knife. The statue of a prince stood on a high platform overlooking the city. This prince was called a happy prince because when he was alive, he always remained very happy. Upon his death, a big statue of his was erected in the center of the city in his remembrance. The statue of this happy prince was covered with thin layer of gold, and instead of eyeballs there were two bright shining sapphire stones in the handle of his sword. A bright ruby stone was placed. एक राजकुमार की मूर्ति एक ऊंचे मंच पर खड़ी थी, जहां से वो सारे शहर को देख सकती थी। यह राजकुमार प्रसन्न स्वभाव का होने के कारण उसे सब हैप्पी प्रिंस कहा करते थे, क्योंकि वह हमेशा खुश रहता था। और जब उसकी मृत्यु हो गई तो शहर के बीच में उसकी एक बड़ी प्रतिमा लगाई गई। उसकी प्रतिमा सोने की पतली परतों से ढकी हुई थी और जो आंखें थी वो चमकदार नीलम के पत्थर की थी। उसकी तलवार का जो हैंडल था उसमें एक चमकदार रूबी मतलब माणिक पत्थर रखा गया था। One night there flew over the city a little swallow. his friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind. Then he decided to go to Egypt too. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. Where shall I put up? He said. I hope the town has made preparations. Swallow means a tiny bird. Put up means where to live for the night. Swallow is a tiny bird. Although it is not a human being, still the writer is referring to it as he and his. He says that all the friends of this swallow had flown away to Egypt 6 weeks ago. This bird did not go with them, but later it thought of going to Egypt to his friends, so it was on its way to Egypt. This bird kept on flying on its way to Egypt, and at night it reached the city of the happy prince. It wanted to stay somewhere for the night. It thinks upon where to stay at night. The bird says that hopefully the city has made some arrangements for it to stay. Obviously, the bird does not mean what it is saying. We can say that probably the bird is being humorous. स्वेल्लो एक नन्हा प्रकार का पक्षी होता है. स्वेल्लो एक नन्हा पक्षी होता है. राइटर ने स्वेल्लो के लिए ही वर्ड का यूज किया है, मतलब वो उसे ह्यूमन बीइंग की तरह रिप्रेजेंट करता है. स्वेल्लो के फ्रेंड्स 6 वीक पहले ही इजिप्ट पहुंच चुके थे. स्वेल्लो उनके साथ नहीं गया था, लेकिन बाद में वो अपने दोस्तों के पास जाना चाहता है. वो अपने दोस्तों के पास इजिप्ट जाने के लिए जब उड़ान भरता है तो रात होने पे वो हैप्पी प्रिंस का जो शहर है जहाँ पे हैप्पी प्रिंस की बड़ी स्टैच्यू लगी है वहाँ पे वो पहुँचता है और उधर ही रात बिताने की सोचता है. Then he saw the statue of the tall column. I will put up there, he cried. It is a fine position with plenty of fresh air. So he alighted just between the feet of the happy prince. Alighted means descended. Now when this tiny bird saw this huge statue of the happy prince, it thought of staying there for the night. So the bird thought that it was a good place to spend the night. There was shelter and a lot of fresh air. It stopped and sat in between the feet of the statue of the happy prince. हैप्पी प्रिंस की स्टैच्यू देख के वो सोचता है कि मैं यहीं पे रुक जाऊं, और वो जो हैप्पी प्रिंस के फीट थे, जो पांव थे, उसके बीच में जाके बैठ जाता है. I have a golden bedroom, he said softly to himself as he looked round and he prepared to go to sleep. But just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. What a curious thing, he cried. There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining. Then another drop fell. Curious means strange. When the bird sat in between the feet of the happy prince, it was surrounded with gold, so it thought that it had a bedroom made of gold because it was surrounded by gold all around. As it was about to sleep, as it was putting its head under the wing, suddenly a large drop of water fell on it. The bird was surprised because all of a sudden a drop of water fell on it. It thought that neither was it raining nor the rainy season was going on. The swallow could not believe This because the sky was not cloudy and stars were shining. Just then, another drop of water fell on it. What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off? He said. I must look for a good chimney pot. And he determined to fly away. But before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up and saw. Ah, what did he see? The swallow thought that the statue was useless because it was not able to protect it from the rain. So he thought he should not sleep under the statue. The swallow thought that it was better if it took shelter in a chimney of a house, and thought to move away from there because the statue was not able to protect from the rain. Before the bird flew away, the third drop of water fell on him, and it looked up. What did he see? Let's find out. स्वेलो सोचता है कि ये जो स्टैचू है वो उसे पानी से नहीं बचा रही है। इससे तो अच्छा ये होता कि वो किसी चिमनी में जाके शरण लेता, लेकिन इससे पहले कि स्वेलो उड़ता, पानी की तीसरी बूंद उसके ऊपर गिर गई और उसने ऊपर देखा और वो ऊपर जाके पता लगाना चाहता था कि पानी कहाँ से गिर रहा है। The eyes of the happy prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. Who are you? He said. I am the happy prince. As soon as the bird looked up, he saw that the eyes of the happy prince statue were filled with tears. These drops of water were the tear drops falling off the statue's golden cheeks. When Swallow looked at Happy Prince's face, it was looking beautiful in the moonlight. The little bird's heart was filled with pity for the weeping statue. It asked the statue that who it was. The statue replied that it was the happy prince. जब स्वेलो ने देखा तो हैप्पी प्रिंस की आंखों में आंसू भरे हुए थे। उसका चेहरा मूनलाइट में सुंदर दिख रहा था। स्वेलो का दिल रोती हुई स्टेच्यू को देख के भर गया। जब स्वेलो ने स्टेच्यू से पूछा कि आप कौन हो, तब स्टेच्यू ने आवाज दी, आंसर दिया कि मैं हैप्पी प्रिंस हूँ। Why are you weeping then? asked the swallow. You have quite drenched me. When I was alive and had a human heart, answered the statue, I did not know what tears were, for I lived in the palace where sorrow is not allowed to enter. Here, drenched means soaked with water. It means the bird asked, Why are you weeping then? And it added that it had soaked it with its tears. स्वेलो ने स्टेच्यू से पूछा कि आप क्यों रो रहे हो, और कहा कि तुमने मुझे भिगो दिया. Then the happy prince narrated his story to the swallow. The happy prince said that when he was alive and he had a human heart means the heart which beats is alive. At that time he was not aware what tears were and what sorrow was, as he lived in a palace where there was happiness all around. हैप्पी प्रिंस ने अपनी कहानी स्वेलो को सुनाई कि वो एक हैप्पी प्रिंस है और वो जब जिंदा थे, जब उनका हृदय अलाइव था, मतलब जिंदा हार्ट था, तब उनको आंसू के बारे में पता नहीं था और वो दुख के बारे में भी कुछ नहीं जानते थे, क्योंकि वो एक बड़े महल में रहते थे जहाँ चारों ओर खुशियाँ थी। My courtiers called me the happy prince, and happy indeed I was. So I lived and so I died, and now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see the ugliness and all the misery of my city, and though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep. Here, misery means sadness. All the people who used to work in his court used to call him Happy Prince because he used to be happy all the time and he had not seen sorrow at all. And he said that he lived happily and died in happiness only. When he had a human heart, he never cried. He was not aware what tears were because he had seen happiness only and never faced any sorrow. Now, when he was dead, they had put him so high in the form of a statue on a pedestal that he could see the whole city and the ugliness of the city. He could see that there were so many people living in the misery, lack of food, hunger, money, homelessness. Now, when the statue's heart was made of lead, a metal, although it did not have any feelings, then also when it saw all the sadness, it became sad and wept. हैप्पी प्रिंस के दरबार में काम करने वाले सभी लोग उसे हैप्पी प्रिंस कहते थे, क्योंकि वह हर समय खुश रहते थे और उसने कभी भी दुख को महसूस नहीं किया था। और उन्होंने कहा कि वह खुशी से रहते थे और खुशी में ही मर गए। अब मरने के बाद उनकी स्टैच्यू ऊंचाई पे रखी थी। बहुत सारे लोग शहर में दुखी है। किसी को भोजन की कमी थी तो कोई भूखा था, किसी के पास पैसे नहीं थे तो बहुत सारे लोग बेघर थे। स्टैच्यू का दिल तो लीड से बना हुआ था, लेकिन लोगों के दुख देख के उसकी आंखों से आंसू निकलने लगते थे। What is he? Not solid gold, said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks. Far away, continued the statue in a low musical voice. Far away, in a little street, there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated to a table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse red hands all pricked by the needle, for she is a seamstress. Here, coarse means rough. Seamstress means a woman who makes a living by sewing. When the happy prince was telling his sad story, the swallow was thinking about something else in his mind. The bird wondered that the statue of the prince was not made of solid gold. It was surprised. It thought that from outside the statue was covered with gold, but as it said that the heart was made of lead and not of gold, it realized that it was hollow and was not made of solid gold. It saw that the statue was very sad and was crying. So He did not make any personal remarks. He did not comment anything about the statue because it was giving the value to the statue's feelings. The statue continued its story. It spoke in a very musical voice that far away there was a house of a poor woman. The window of her house was open, and it could see through the window that she was sitting near the table. Her voice was thin, and she was tired. Her hands were rough and had become red because they had been pricked by the needle. The woman was a seamstress. जब हैप्पी प्रिंस अपनी कहानी सुना रहा था तब स्वेलो सोच रहा था, क्या ये मूर्ति सॉलिड गोल्ड से नहीं बनी थी? ये सोच के उसे बहुत आश्चर्य होता है क्योंकि हैप्पी प्रिंस का जो हार्ट था वो लीड से बनाया गया था, लेकिन वो जो हैप्पी प्रिंस की स्टैचू है उसकी फीलिंग्स के बारे में सोचता है। प्रिंस अपनी कहानी संगीतमय आवाज़ से कहते हैं कि बहुत दूर एक गरीब महिला का घर है और उसकी खिड़की से वो देख सकते हैं कि वो टेबल के पास बैठी हुई थी। उसका चेहरा पतला था और वह थकी हुई थी। उसके हाथ लाल हो चुके थे क्योंकि उसके हाथ में बहुत बार सुई चुभी थी, क्योंकि महिला सिलाई करने वाली थी, कपड़े सीने वाली थी। She is embroidering flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the queen's maids of honor to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking his mother to give him oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water. So he is crying, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal and I cannot move." Here, sword hilt means the handle of the sword, pedestal means raised platform. The woman was embroidering flowers on a gown of the queen's maid who would walk along with the queen during the court ball. The statue said that the lady who was embroidering the gown had a little child who was not well. He was suffering from fever and was asking his mom to give him oranges. His mother was very poor. She had no money. She could only give him water, that also river water, and that is why the little boy was crying. So the happy prince statue requested the swallow to take out the ruby stone from the handle of its sword and give it to the lady. It added that its feet were fastened to the platform because of which it could not move. सीमस्ट्रेस है वो जो रानी की दासी है, उसके गाउन में एम्ब्रॉयडरी कर रही थी और उसका जो बेटा है वो बीमार था। वो उसको पानी के अलावा कुछ नहीं दे सकती थी और वो सिर्फ नदी का पानी था, इसलिए वो छोटा लड़का रो रहा था। हैप्पी प्रिंस स्वेल्लो को रिक्वेस्ट करते हैं कि उसकी तलवार पे झड़ा हुआ जो रूबी पत्थर है वो निकाल के उस औरत को दे के आओ, क्योंकि उनके जो पाँव है वो तो प्लेटफॉर्म से, इस कारण वो चल के उस औरत की मदद नहीं कर सकते थे, लेकिन स्वेल्लो तो उड़ के वहाँ पे जाके उसकी मदद कर सकता था। I am waited for in Egypt said the swallow. My friends are flying up and down the Nile and talking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep. The prince asked the swallow to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. The boy is so thirsty and the mother so sad, he said. The swallow replied that it had to go to Egypt. Its friends were waiting for it. The swallow said that its friends were in Egypt. They were flying near the Nile River and talking to the large lotus flowers which grew there. Soon they would go to sleep, and so it wanted to reach Egypt at the earliest. The statue requested the swallow to stay with him for one night. He asked him to be his messenger and work on his behalf. He said that the boy was very thirsty and his mother was very sad, so it should go and give the ruby stone to her. यहाँ पे स्वेलो है वो अपने फ्रेंड्स के पास इजिप्ट जाना चाहता था, लेकिन हैप्पी प्रिंस उसको एक रात ठहरने के लिए रिक्वेस्ट करते हैं और उसका मैसेंजर बन के उस औरत की मदद करने को कहते हैं. I don't think I like boys, answered the swallow. I want to go to Egypt. But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. It is very cold here, he said, but he agreed to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. Thank you, little swallow, said the prince. Once again, the swallow opposed his request and said that it did not like boys, so why should it help that boy? Moreover, it had to go to Egypt. The happy prince was so sad that swallow felt sorry for him. It said that it was very cold there, but it would stay with him for one night and the next morning it would do his work. The happy prince thanked him. एक बार फिर से हैप्पी प्रिंस की बात स्वेलो ने नहीं मानी और उसने कहा कि वो उसे लड़के पसंद नहीं है, इसलिए इसे उस लड़के की मदद क्यों करनी चाहिए. इसके अलावा वो इजिप्ट जाना चाहता था, लेकिन राजकुमार को दुखी देख के स्वेलो उनको हाँ कहता है और उसकी मदद करने के लिए तैयार हो जाता है. हैप्पी प्रिंस स्वेलो को थैंक्स कहते हैं. द स्वेलो पिक्ड आउट द ग्रेट रूबी फ्रॉम द प्रिंस स्वॉर्ड and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. He passed by the cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. Finally, the swallow took out the ruby stone from the happy prince's sword, and the bird took the ruby in its beak and flew over the town. As the swallow was on its way to the poor woman's house, it passed the cathedral. Cathedral is a church, and on the church tower, white colored marble angels were sculptured. Then he reached the palace. He crossed the palace and he could hear the sound of dancing from inside the palace. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball, she said. I have ordered flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy. When this swallow was crossing over the palace, a girl came out on the balcony along with her lover. She was hoping that the gown which she had given to the seamstress for embroidering would be ready on time. She was talking about the same gown on which that lady was doing embroidering, to whom the bird had to give the ruby stone. He passed over the river and saw the lanterns hanging on the masts of the ships. At last he came to the poor woman's house and looked in. The boy was losing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep. She was so tired. Mast means sail of the ship. Tossing means turning left and right. When the swallow flew over the river, ships also came along the way. Lanterns were hanging on their sails. Finally, the swallow reached the woman's house. The boy was suffering from fever, and for that reason he was not able to go to sleep. So he was turning left and right on his bed, and his mother was very tired due to walking for long and had fallen asleep. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Thimble means a metal or plastic cap with a closed end, one to protect the finger and push the needle in sewing. The swallow put the ruby stone on the table near the thimble. स्वेलो ने रूबी को थिम्बल के पास टेबल पर रख दिया. Then he flew gently round the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings. How cool I feel, said the boy. I must be getting better. And he sank into a delicious slumber. Sank means drowned, but here it means the boy in going to sleep. Slumber means sleep. After keeping the ruby stone on the table, the swallow went near the boy. As his mother was sleeping and no one was taking care of him, it shook its wings near him, because of which the boy could feel the cool air and felt better. The boy felt that he was getting better and went to sleep. With this, we can make out that the swallow was a kind-hearted bird. रूबी को टेबल पे रखने के बाद स्वेल्लो लड़के के पास जाता है. उसकी माँ सो रही थी और उसकी देखभाल करने वाला कोई नहीं था. उसने अपने पंख हिला के उस लड़के को हवा दी. लड़के को ये हवा से शांति मिली, सुकून मिला. वो बेहतर महसूस करने लगा. लड़के को लगा कि वो अब ठीक हो रहा है और सो गया. इससे हमें पता चलता है कि जो स्वेल्लो है उसका दिल बहुत ही अच्छा है. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. It is curious, he remarked, but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold. That is because you have done a good action, said the prince. And the little swallow began to think and then fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. The swallow flew back and went to the statue of Happy Prince and told him what all he had done. Now the bird felt warm. It says that it was very strange that it was feeling little warm even though the weather was very cold. The prince said that it was feeling warm because it had done a good deed. It had helped someone. After listening to Happy Prince, the swallow started thinking, and when he started thinking, he felt sleepy because whenever he thought, he used to feel sleepy. When day broke, he flew down to the river and had a bath. Tonight I go to Egypt, said the swallow, and he was in high spirits at the prospect. He visited all the monuments and sat a long time on top of the church steeple. Prospect means thought of something, and steeple means high tower of the church. When it was night and the moon rose in the sky, the swallow went to Happy Prince and sought permission to leave for Egypt. So, the swallow bird visited all the monuments of the city, and finally he went and sat on the high tower of the church. When the moon rose, he flew back to the Happy Prince. Have you any commissions for Egypt? He cried. I'm just starting. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince. Will you stay with me one night longer? I am waited for in Egypt, answered the swallow. When it was night and the moon rose in the sky, the swallow went to Happy Prince and sought permission to leave for Egypt. Now again Happy Prince requested Swallow to stay with him for one more night, and Swallow replied that he needed to go to Egypt because his friends were waiting for him. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, far away across the city I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in the glass by his side there is a bunch of withered violets. Garret means small dark room at the top of the house. Withered means worn out. Violet means kind of flower. Now here the Happy Prince is telling the swallow about his second walk. He says that far away across the city I could see in a small dark room at the top of the house a young man is sitting. He was sitting on a desk on which the papers were spread all over, and he was trying to work hard. He had a glass lying near him in which withered flowers were lying. His hair is brown and crisp, and his eyes are red as a pomegranate, and he has large and dreamy eyes. He is trying to finish a play for the director of the theatre, but he is too cold to write anymore. There is no fire in the grate, and hunger has made him faint. Here, pomegranate means it's a type of a fruit. Granite means fireplace. Faint means weak. Further, the Happy Prince gave a description of that boy. He said that his hair were brown and crisp, which meant that he had not taken bath for a long time. His lips were red like a pomegranate, and he had big dreamy eyes. That means that this boy was very ambitious and hardworking. The Happy Prince also said that this boy needed to finish writing a play. He was a writer, and he had to give the play to the director after writing, but he did not have strength to write anymore because he was feeling very cold. The boy had no money, so that's why there was no fire in his fireplace, and he was very hungry, also due to which he was feeling very weak. I will wait with you one night longer, said the swallow, who really had a good heart. He asked if he should take another ruby to the young playwright. Alas, I have no ruby now, said the prince. My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires, which were brought out of India 1,000 years ago. The swallow understood what Happy Prince was trying to tell him. He knew that Happy Prince wanted to help this boy, so he agreed to stay back for one more night. And further, the swallow asked Happy Prince if he should take another ruby stone to give it to the young playwright, just like he had given it to the old lady. Prince said that it was very sad that he did not have any more ruby stones with him. Happy Prince said that now he had his eyes, which were made of very precious and rare sapphire stones, which had been bought thousands of years ago from India. He ordered the swallow to pluck out one of them and take it to the playwright. He will sell it to the jeweler and buy firewood and finish his play, he said. Dear prince, said the swallow, I cannot do that, and he began to weep. So Happy Prince told Swallow to take out one sapphire and give it to the boy. The swallow was very sad to learn that the Happy Prince wanted to give his eyes to that boy, and he started crying. He told Happy Prince that he could not do so. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, do as I command you. So the swallow plucked out the prince's eye and flew away to the young man's garret. It was easy enough to get in, as there was a hole in the roof. Through this he darted and came into the room. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings, and when he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. Darted means pushed himself inside. But then the prince ordered the swallow to do what he had told him to do. So finally, the swallow took out one eye, one sapphire out of the prince's eye, and flew to the young man's garret. There was a hole on the roof of the room, so the swallow entered the room through that hole. The boy was sitting with his head on his hands, and that's why he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wing, and when he looked up, he saw the sapphire stone lying on the dried flowers. I am beginning to be appreciated, he cried. This is from some great admirer. Now I can finish my play, and he looked quite happy. The next day the swallow flew down to the harbour. He sat on the mast of a large vessel and watched the sailors working. I am going to Egypt, cried the swallow, but nobody minded, and when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. Here, appreciate means to praise someone. Harbor means sea, port. When the boy saw the beautiful stone, he felt that some admirer, some person who praised him, had sent a gift for him. So he thought that with this he could now finish his play. Next morning, the swallow bird flew down to the harbor and sat on a mast of a ship. He spoke loudly that he was going to Egypt, and when it was night, he flew back to Happy Prince. I have come to bid you goodbye, he cried. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince. Will you not stay with me one night longer? It is winter, answered the swallow, and the snow will soon be here. In Egypt, the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. Swallow once again told the happy prince that it had come to say goodbye. He was going to Egypt, and once again Happy Prince requested Swallow to stay with him for one more night. The swallow said to the happy prince that the winter season had started and after some time it would start snowing. The weather in Egypt was warm and even the crocodiles lay on the mud lazily there. So he told him to let him go to Egypt. In the square below, said the happy prince, there stands a little match girl. She has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not bring home some money, and she is crying. She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare. Pluck out my other eye and give it to her, and her father will not beat her. Now, this was the third assignment. The happy prince said that there was a match girl. She was a little girl, and all her matchsticks had fallen in the gutter and got wet. All her matchsticks were spoiled, so she could not sell them, and she would not earn any money. And when she would go home without money, then her father would get angry and beat her. For this reason, the girl was crying. Further, the happy prince said that she was not wearing shoes or stockings, and she had not covered her head. She was very poor. So he said to the swallow to take out another sapphire from his eyes and give it to her so that her father did not beat her. I will stay with you one night longer, said the swallow, but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be quite blind then. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, do as I command you. Swallow agreed to stay with him for one more night, but he refused to take out another sapphire because if he did that, then Happy Prince would be blind. Again, Happy Prince told Swallow to do what he had ordered him. So he plucked out the prince's other eye and darted down with it. He swooped past the match girl and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. What a lovely bit of glass, cried the little girl, and she ran home laughing. Here, swooped means fly very low. So finally, the swallow obeyed the happy prince's order. He took another sapphire stone from his eye and flew to the little match girl. And when he saw the match girl, he bent very low and kept the sapphire stone on the little girl's hand. The little girl was very happy to see the stone, and she went home happily. Then the swallow came back to the prince. "You are blind now," he said, "so I'll stay with you always." "No, little swallow," said the poor prince, "you must go away to Egypt." When Swallow returned to the happy prince, he told him that now he was blind and so he would stay with him forever. But happy prince said to the swallow that he should go to Egypt. "No, I will stay with you always," said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands. But Swallow refused and said that he would stay with him only, and he slept on the prince's feet. The swallow used to stay along with Happy Prince all the time and used to tell him the stories of the different places that he had visited. "Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvelous things, but more marvelous than anything is the suffering of man and women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there." The happy prince said to the swallow to tell him wonderful things, but added that nothing was more wonderful than the suffering of people. No mystery was bigger than sadness, and he wanted to know who all were sad in his kingdom. So he asked the swallow to go and let him know what he saw while flying over the city. So the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at the gates. He flew into dark lands and saw the white faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. So the swallow flew and took a round over the city and saw that the rich people were living happily in their beautiful houses, and they were partying while the poor people were begging and sitting outside the gates. Then he went to the dark lands where there was no light also, and the poor people lived. There he saw that the children were hungry, due to which their faces had turned white. Under the archway of a bridge, two little boys were lying in each other's arms to try and keep themselves warm. "How hungry we are," they said. "You must not lie here," shouted the watchman, and they wandered out into the rain. Further, the swallow saw two little boys under the archway of the bridge. They were lying much close to each other so that they kept themselves warm. They were so poor, they didn't have food, so they were trying to keep each other warm. Two children were starving and wondering at how hungry they were. Just then a watchman appeared and scolded them. He shouted and made them go away from there. The poor children kept wandering in the rain as they were homeless. Then he flew back and told the prince what he had seen. I am covered with fine gold, said the prince. You must take it off leaf by leaf and give it to the poor. The living always think that gold can make them happy. Swallow went back to Happy Prince and told him what he had seen in the city. The Happy Prince told Swallow that his whole body was covered with fine gold. He could take tiny pieces of gold from his body and give it to the poor people in need. All the living beings required money, and when they would get gold, they would feel happy. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow picked off till the Happy Prince looked quite dull and grey. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold he brought to the poor, and the children's face grew rosier, and they laughed and played in the street. We have bread now, they cried. Then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet caps and skated on the ice. Finally, it started snowing, and when a lot of snow fell, everything froze. Everyone was wearing clothes made of fur. Small children were wearing red color caps and were roaming here and there. They were skating on the ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. He picked up crumbs outside the baker's door when the baker was not looking and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. The swallow did not want to die, so he used to go to the bakery where the baker used to bake the bread, to eat the bread crumbs and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. But at last he knew that he was going to die. He had just enough strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. Goodbye, dear prince, he murmured. Will you let me kiss your hand? The swallow was aware that he was about to die, and that's why he says to the Happy Prince that can I kiss your hand? I am glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow, said the prince. You have stayed too long here, but you must kiss me on the lips, for I love you. It is not to Egypt that I am going, said the swallow. I am going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not? And he kissed the Happy Prince on the lips and fell down dead at his feet. Happy Prince thought that the swallow wanted to go to Egypt, so he said that he was very happy that finally the bird was going to Egypt. Happy Prince said to the swallow that it had stayed there for a very long time and now it should go to Egypt. It wanted the bird to kiss its lips instead of the hands because the statue loved the bird. The swallow said to the Happy Prince that he was not going to Egypt but to the house of death. He added that death was a brother of sleep. He kissed the Happy Prince on his lips and fell down to the feet of Happy Prince and died. At that moment, a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. The fact is that the leaden heart had snapped right in two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. Early the next morning, the mayor was walking in the square below in company with the town councillors. As they passed the column, he looked up at the statue. Dear me, how shabby the happy prince looks, he said. Here, shabby means untidy. As soon as the bird died on the happy prince's feet, an unusual sound came out from the statue. The sound was of the breaking of the statue's heart, which was made of a lead. The heart broke because of the death of his beloved bird, but it is said that it was so cold that the heart broke into two pieces. The next morning, the mayor of the city, along with his councillors, was taking a round of the area where the statue of Happy Prince was erected, and when he crossed the statue and looked up at it, he said that the statue of Happy Prince looked untidy. How shabby indeed, cried the town councillors, who always agreed with the mayor, and they went up to look at it. The ruby has fallen out of his sword. His eyes are gone, and he is golden no longer, said the mayor. In fact, he is little better than a beggar. Little better than a beggar, said the town councillors. The councillors always agreed with whatever the mayor used to say, so they also asserted that the statue looked untidy. The mayor noticed that the ruby stone which was placed in the handle of the sword was missing. The sapphires from the statue's eyes were also missing, and the layer of the gold from its body was also missing. The mayor said that it seemed as if it was the statue of a beggar, and the town councillors agreed with him. And here is actually a dead bird at his feet, continued the mayor. We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here, and the town clerk made a note of the suggestion. So they pulled down the statue of the happy prince. As he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer useful, said the art professor at the university. Here, proclamation means order or rule. The mayor noticed that a dead bird was lying on the feet of the statue. Then he told the town councillors to pass an order that birds were not allowed to die on the feet of the statue, and the town clerk made a note of the suggestion given by him. The art professor of the university said that now the statue of the happy prince did not look beautiful and was not useful anymore, and so they should demolish it. Then they melted the statue in a furnace. What a strange thing, said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry. This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace. We must throw it away. So they threw it on a dust heap where the dead swallow was also lying. Here, furnace means is a fireplace where metal are melted. Overseer means supervisor. Foundry means workshop for casting metals. So they melted the statue which was made of lead in a furnace. The supervisor of the foundry saw a strange thing. The heart of the happy prince statue, which was broken into two pieces, was not melting in the furnace, so they threw it as it is in the dust heap. Coincidentally, they threw the heart of the happy prince where the dead swallow was also lying. Bring me the two most precious things in the city, said God to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the leaden heart and the dead bird. You have rightly chosen, said God, for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forever more, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me. God asked one of his angels to bring him the two most precious things of the city. The angel brought the two pieces of heart of the statue and the dead swallow bird. God said to the angel that it had brought the right thing. It had chosen the right things, which were indeed the most precious things of the city. He said that the bird would always sing in the garden of his paradise, and the happy prince would stay in his city of gold and admire him. So guys, it was the end of the story. See you soon. Stay home, stay safe.